All right, thank you, Suzanne. My name is Adi Murati. I'm a pre-sales consultant here at CA Technologies, and my primary focus is around application performance. Speaking as a developer myself, I'm going to be going through the basic triage and understanding more of how we can approach web and mobile performance triage more effectively with App Analytics. If you're watching this webcast, you're probably familiar with some items. If there are any additional items that you have questions about, as Suzanne was mentioning, feel free to shoot over those questions. And we'll be talking about some of the different facets that we really want to focus on when it comes to application performance. So starting off, I'm going to go through why front-to-back visibility is so important. And I'll explain more about what I mean by that. We'll cover the front-end aspect of triage, and we'll cover the back-end aspect of triage. I'll do a brief demonstration of how we approach it today, and then I'll open up for any Q&A questions that anyone has. So starting off, there are a lot of steps that developers and app performance engineers follow to make sure that their applications work before they release them. But the problem is that once they release them to production, there's a lack of visibility. And what I mean by that is once we've released a mobile application or a web application, we don't usually know what our users are actually doing with the applications, and we don't know what problems they're encountering. And we need to be able to have that visibility. So whether it's what the customer is seeing, which is that front-end aspect, so if it's a mobile application or their website, right, we need to make sure that it's functioning at all times. At the same time, there's also that back-end component. And again, once we've released it to production, we rarely have in-depth visibility. And these environments, these application environments, grow more and more complex, as you can actually see on the screen. So when it comes to application performance, we want to be able to understand and tie performance across the whole line of business, so from the front end to the back end. So starting off, when it comes to front-end performance, there are a few things that we really want to understand. When we look at triaging a mobile application, for instance, or a web application, one of the most valuable things is seeing what a user does, and more specifically, if a user encounters a crash, we want to be able to capture what's called a stack trace, or a call stack you'll hear a lot of times. And this is really valuable because as a developer, when we test these applications, we try to make sure that they don't encounter any errors. But once it's on the customer's device, we usually can't see what errors they're encountering. With this, we're actually able to go ahead, with App Analytics, we're able to go ahead and actually see when a customer encounters a problem, and we can identify it more promptly and understand where a specific exception is thrown. And I'll go more into this in the demonstration. Additionally, we want to be able to actually see how performance is over time. We want to be able to tie it to infrastructure or code or specific design as far as the performance. So I want to be able to see the entire session when a user encounters a crash or a performance issue. Say the CPU is all used up or a specific request fails, 404 error. Whenever these errors occur or these problems occur and we try to triage, one of the things that we immediately think of and we are immediately tasked with as developers or performance engineers is replicate, replicate, replicate. That's the first step. And it's a supreme challenge to be able to see what an application looks like through the customer's eyes. But by using App Analytics, we can actually see, instead of us having to replicate the entire session and try and pinpoint where the problem is, we can actually easily see what the user did themselves to get to that problem. So we can see that specific crash, or we can identify when there's a performance issue like latency, or as I like to put it, the buffering screen that everyone loves on YouTube, right? We want to be able to see that performance so that we can triage this more effectively. But just as important, we want to be able to jump from that front-end visibility, and we actually want to tie it to the back end. So in addition to that front-end stack trace and understanding exceptions and errors from the front-end perspective, we also want to understand when a user clicks a button or encounters an issue, we want to be able to trace that exception to the back end as well. So we want to see if it's a back-end error, we want to be able to trace that stack trace. And so with that, I'm going to start by giving a demonstration here. We have, as our first step when it comes to being a performance engineer or triage, let me go ahead and just quickly log back in. When it comes to performance aspect or performance triage, we want to start by being able to understand from the front-end perspective, so the parts that basically impact the customer the most. So when we pull up, our first priority needs to be identifying which application is going to require the heaviest focus. And what I mean by that is there are usually a few different factors that are involved. The first is going to be understanding the number of users. Users typically mean business, right? The more users you have, the more business is done with that application, and it's usually the more money that you make. So looking at this performance, this number of users, our monthly active users here, I can tell that TixChange is by far my most important application. Equally as important, though, we want to be able to understand from a performance standpoint which application requires the most attention, right? One of the things that I always point out is you might get away with users not noticing some slow performance, some small slow performance, but they always notice a crash, because when a crash occurs, the application dies, right? It ends. So it's easily noticeable. So we want to go ahead, we want to actually understand which ones are most important on the crash count as well. Looking again at both items here to prioritize these applications, I can quickly tell that it's actually TixChange that's going to require the most focus. It has the most per crashes, and it's the most business heavy. So this is the most business critical application in my environment. So I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper to get some more granularity around this. What we can see is we can see overall usage and performance, but where I want to focus a little bit more when it comes to triage is I actually want to focus on session level views and crashes. So to start off, I'll pull up a session, and these sessions could be web-based sessions like we see here, Windows, or they could be iOS or Android sessions. So starting off, we can actually see a little bit more detail around these various exceptions. So I'll start by pulling up this exception. And as I was mentioning, we want to be able to understand that front-end stack trace, right? What we normally can't see when a user encounters an error. So just to briefly explain what the stack trace is saying, I like to start off from this line number and then go up. And I'll explain why. So we start by line 1723. So as a developer, when it comes to programming these applications, they can grow massively, be hundreds of millions of lines of code.
Audie, are you speaking? Audie, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Yeah, Audie, if you can hear me, we can't hear you anymore.
Hey,
Ashley,
sorry about that. I think
okay, there we go.
Phone just hung up.
Okay, there you go. Yep, fine.
All right. So as I was mentioning, we want to be able to understand the stack trace. So starting off, these applications can be massive, hundreds of millions of lines of code. And as a developer, I want to be able to quickly identify a specific line that's causing this code level issue from the front end perspective. So I can actually see that this line is 1723 is where the exception threw. And the reason why this is so important is it saves me a lot of time. Additionally, there are a few other items that are really important for us as developers or operations analysts or performance engineers. We want to be able to understand things like the method name, the class name, the crash type. The crash type is going to tell us what went wrong. So it looks like there was an activity that was being searched for and it threw this activity not found exception. Understanding a bit more about the class name, it's almost like the overall process that was being encountered at the time. So it was trying to do an instrumentation with this application. And as a final note, we can see the specific task. And this was checking for a start activity result. So it actually checked for a result for this activity, but didn't find the activity. And that's where this exception threw. So the reason why this is so important is because with this knowledge, I can actually, as a developer, address this through what's known as exception handling, or fix this problem directly. So what I mean by that is when people encounter an application, they will notice two things. Either that that application fixes itself immediately, right, from their perspective that it fixes itself immediately, or that that application continues to fail. And if it fixes itself immediately, they remember that, right? They say this application works. Even if there's any problem, it immediately works. Those people know exactly what I experienced. And if they don't, they remember that equally as well. Additionally, there are other items that are very important to us. In addition to the exceptions, there are a lot of errors that could be thrown. Things like insufficient CPU or out-of-memory usage. And so with this understanding, with these metrics at the top, this information at the top, we can actually understand more about what detail or what error may have been thrown that contributed to this. So looking a bit deeper, we can actually see across the top, we can see more of the swim lane performance. And we can see this for, not just Android, but also for iOS applications or web applications, as I was saying before. So I'll actually dive into an iOS session here, just to give an example. We can actually see the screenshots across the top. And one of my favorite features is when it comes to replicating the front-end issue, we can actually watch a video replay. And the reason why this is so important is we can actually see, you'll notice this green dot, we can see where users clicked and where they encountered performance issues, right? We notice that, and that's really valuable to be able to replicate that without having to go through this whole process of setting up a laboratory environment. We can see this in production. So I can see that they clicked this login button with this user 10 credential, and it looks like it died here. And sure enough, looking at the feedback, we can actually see that that's what they said. The app crashed when they tried to log in to complete the order. Looking at the swim lane view, we can actually understand over time how performance was impacted by the user's interaction. So what I mean by that is if they clicked a button and that request failed, so for instance, if it tried to call a resource or place an order and placing an order failed, we want to be able to see that. We want to be able to see if it was slow or if it impacted the device negatively. So once we've gathered more of this front-end performance viewpoint, and we're able to see from the front end how users used the application and where they encountered performance pitfalls, we do want to dive a little bit deeper. We want to be able to see more about the back end. So I want to be able to trace this issue to back-end performance as well. So I can pull up this filter network events, which means all these different calls that are being made to the back end. And simply by clicking this link, I can actually see the back-end application performance. And more specifically, I wanted to highlight this stack trace. So this is the session that we just carried over from the front end. And what you'll notice is it lasted roughly something like 32 seconds or so. It was, a fairly long session. What I do want to call your attention to is we can see the different calls that were made from the front to the back. And what you'll notice is there's this small red box. And I just want to explain what this is. This is showing that an error or an exception was thrown on the back end. And specifically, the size of this tells how long this small exception lasted, or this small exception went before it threw the exception. And what we notice is that what's really startling is that even the smallest issue, something like a 9 millisecond exception that was thrown, can ruin the whole transaction, right? Placing an order, if that place order transaction, that place order call fails, even for 9 milliseconds, the whole transaction's over with. I want you to kind of grasp that. So I want to dive a little bit deeper. When it comes to triaging the back-end performance, I want to be able to understand more about the why here. So I can actually go ahead and I can click the summary view. And this is basically going to give us more of this back-end transaction trace. And there are a few items that you'll notice. You'll notice the colors. You'll notice the difference in shading. And the reason why this is so important is we can see where errors or exceptions were thrown by the color red. But more importantly, we can actually see the weighting of how responsible a component or a call was based on how dark that shade is. So what I mean by that is it looks like this web service here caused an issue. Additionally, we have another view as well. We have a tree view. And what I like to phrase this as is basically follow the red until there is no more, and you will have found the root cause. And what I mean by that is just expanding it, we can actually look for where red is. And sure enough, we see again that it was this check item associated with this product line inventory. So it looks like there was an order that was being placed, checked for an item, and it failed. And we can also see from a different perspective as well. We can understand more about the duration that was responsible. So for instance, I just clicked an exception here, and we can see that out of this total call stack on the back end, we can see that it took about 33% of the duration. We can also see the specific error that was thrown. So it looks like it tried to establish a connection. That connection was refused. And we can see what method was being called. So we get this detailed information, this detailed stack trace, to be able to understand both the front-end performance and that back-end performance. And with that in mind, you can also go and check out the tools yourself, the tools that I just presented today. You can actually see how you can use them to gather post-production or in the production environment to gather stack traces or detailed performance information around your applications. Are there any questions?
Okay. So if anybody, let's see, we have a question in the Q&A window. We actually have two. How is this instrumented? Do we insert code via the web server similar to Google Analytics, or does it get shipped with the mobile app?
So there are a few ways that we instrument it. I'll start by explaining the mobile aspect, and I'll go briefly to the web. So when it comes to mobile, with iOS, there's an SDK involved. We actually have a tool that doesn't require code-level access for Android applications. And we're able to go ahead and capture more of that different transaction-level data, performance data from Android or iOS applications. And when it comes to monitoring the front-end web applications, we are able to monitor that via a JavaScript snippet that we add to the front-end code, so that when a user clicks it, we're able to track that different performance or different user events. And then on the back-end performance, to get that back-end view as well, you would go ahead, you'd place an agent on your application server. And what it does is it actually does this through a bytecode instrumentation. I won't spend too much time explaining about that, but you place that agent on your server and you're able to get that back-end visibility.
Great, thank you. There is another question in the Q&A box. Actually, it might be an ad you might have answered. Or is this a port aggregator or PIM or both?
A port aggregator or PIM or both?
TIM, like Tim, T as in Tim, I, M as in Mary.
Oh, I got you. You're thinking
capital letters.
I gotcha. You're thinking something like a transaction impact monitor or like customer experience manager, like another APM tool. So this doesn't focus on the ports like the transaction impact monitor does. It is a code level instrumentation for the front end. So does that answer the question? It doesn't look through the ports for that information. It looks via the code level.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it was on the it was online, so I'm not sure. We'll pause for a minute. I think there's something in the chat. I'm going to check it right now.
And
okay.
if anyone needs more clarity around the answers or anything as well, feel free to shoot me an email. It's right here, and I'll be more than happy to go ahead and answer that in more detail.
Okay, great. And Audie, if you can just click on the Q&A window, and there's nothing else there. So if there is any questions to be asked online, if you can just hit #6, we can take your answer verbally.
I do see another question. Do you want me to answer this, Suzanne, on the call? All right. So the question is this a competing product to Dynatrace or AppDynamics or New Relic? Yes. So there are a variety of solutions out there. This is one of the approaches that you can take. So yeah, it is a competing product. But by all means, investigate them all, see which one works best for your team.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions. Again, final call. Any questions, if you'd like to ask, you can put it in the Q&A box, or again, hit #6 on your phone line and you can ask it on the line. Okay. So with that, there's no other questions that I can see. So I would like to thank Audie for his presentation and demo today. And I would like to thank all of the attendees for joining the call. We hope you got some value out of it. And that concludes our call for today. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day, your night, your morning. Thank you.